Welcome back to the deep dive. Before we even get into the weeds today, I need you to do me a quick favor.
Yeah, just take half a second right now.
Exactly. Hit that like button and subscribe to the show. We bring you the most intense, heavily researched breakdowns of the books, the data, and the ideas that are actively shaping our world right now.
And subscribing ensures you never miss out on the incredible value we try to unpack here every single time.
It really does. And today's deep dive is, frankly, it's an absolute blockbuster. We have an exclusive, comprehensive review of a newly released 2025 ebook that is currently setting the internet on fire.
The title alone is causing a massive stir.
Oh yeah, it's titled Marriage Deformed: How Marxist Feminists Redefine Marriage to Destroy Men and Kill Western Civilization by Conrad Riker.
It's quite the title.
Now I have to tell you right out of the gate, to truly grasp the raw, unfiltered data we are about to discuss, you really need to buy this book.
You need to see the citations for yourself.
Right. It is available right now on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books. We are going to give you an incisive, fascinating breakdown of its most explosive claims, but getting your own copy is essential.
So what's our specific mission today?
Well, our mission today is highly specific. We are tailoring this exploration to deeply understand the worldview of men's rights activists and the men operating within what is often called the red-pilled manosphere.
We want to understand the history of our modern institutions.
Yes, specifically understanding how they functioned before the author claims they were captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies. We're going to unpack Riker's core arguments step by step.
Exactly. And before we dive into the first chapter, it is absolutely crucial that we set some firm ground rules for today's discussion.
Let's lay them out.
The material we are covering today is highly politically charged. It touches on some of the most sensitive, debated aspects of gender, law, society, and personal relationships.
Extremely sensitive.
So we want to be explicitly clear to you, the listener. We are not taking sides today. We are not endorsing the viewpoints, the ideologies, or the political stances presented in this book.
Not at all.
Whether these ideas lean right, left, or exist entirely outside the traditional political spectrum, our personal opinions are totally irrelevant here.
Our only job today is to impartially report the data.
Right, the data, the statistics, and the arguments, exactly as they are presented in the source material. We're doing this to help you understand why these specific ideas are gaining massive, unprecedented traction among millions of men globally.
Knowledge is most valuable when it's understood in its proper context.
And understanding this perspective, regardless of how you personally feel about it, is vital for grasping the current cultural conversation.
I think that's the perfect framing. So let's get right into it. The book doesn't really ease the reader in. Chapter 1 introduces a concept Riker calls the marriage plantation.
The marriage plantation?
Yeah. His foundational argument is that modern marriage as an institution is no longer a sacred bond, nor is it a partnership of equals. Instead, he explicitly labels it a recipe for male subjugation and financial castration.
Those are heavy words.
They are. The core thesis here is that the legal contract of marriage has been entirely rewritten over the last few decades, specifically to strip men of their accumulated assets.
It's a very provocative term, the marriage plantation. And what we need to look at is the specific data Riker uses to build this case. He doesn't just rely on rhetoric.
No, she brings the numbers.
He points directly to government statistics to outline the modern economics of divorce. For instance, he cites Centers for Disease Control data showing that women initiate between 70 to 80% of all divorces in the United States.
Let me pause you there, because I think conventional wisdom, the narrative most of us hear in mainstream media, assumes that if women are initiating 80% of divorces, it must be because they are fundamentally unhappy.
Right, the assumption is that the husband is doing something wrong.
Exactly, like cheating or being neglectful. How does Riker counter that standard narrative?
That is exactly the friction point the book addresses. Riker argues against that conventional wisdom by focusing purely on the financial incentives.
The money.
Always the money. He posits that the current legal system actively incentivizes women to leave by offering them a financial parachute woven directly from their husband's future earnings.
So no-fault divorce plays a big role here.
Huge. In his view, no-fault divorce isn't framed as a tool of liberation, which is how it was originally sold back in the 1970s.
How does he frame it?
He frames it as a legal mechanism that allows a binding contract to be unilaterally broken by one party, for any reason or no reason at all, while the other party is legally compelled to continue paying for the dissolution of that contract indefinitely.
And when we talk about paying for it, we have to look at the alimony data he pulls, because this is where the financial argument gets very granular.
Let's hear the numbers.
Riker digs into the Bureau of Labor Statistics data, highlighting that a staggering 97% of alimony payers are men.
97%.
97%. And we aren't talking about a few $100s to help someone get back on their feet. He notes the average payout is around $15,000 yearly. He goes so far as to literally refer to alimony as state-sponsored robbery.
To understand why he uses such strong language, we have to look at how these payments are enforced, even when circumstances change.
Right. Because life happens. People lose jobs.
Exactly. Riker presents a deeply analytical breakdown from the Chicago Law Review. The analysis looks at what happens when individuals go back to court to modify their alimony based on changing financial realities.
And what did the law review find?
The data shows that when men lose their jobs or suffer a massive medical setback and go to court to request a reduction in their alimony payments, they are denied 68% of the time.
Wow.
The courts essentially tell them that their current financial pain or lack of employment doesn't negate their obligation to maintain their ex-wife's standard of living.
But there's a flip side to that statistic, right? What happens when the woman's financial situation changes?
Right. According to that same Chicago Law Review analysis, when women experience a drop in income and request financial relief or increased support from their ex-husbands,
The courts grant it.
they grant those requests 91% of the time.
That is a massive disparity. 68% denial rate for men asking for help versus a 91% approval rate for women asking for more.
It is. And Riker gives this phenomenon a name. He calls it gynocratic inflation.
Gynocratic inflation. Define that for the listener.
He defines this as a systemic reality where our institutions inherently protect and inflate female financial interests while treating male financial struggles as personal moral failures.
He also mentions an unwritten rule in the family courts.
Yes, he calls it the "you built it, she keeps it" doctrine. The argument is that the state essentially views a man's future labor as community property, even after the community has been dissolved by the other party.
So we have to ask, what does this actually mean for the men going through this system? Because reading statistics on a page is one thing, but the human toll is another.
The human toll is where it gets very grim.
Riker shares a really dark reality to highlight this. He cites 2014 research from Divorce Corps showing that divorced men are 10 times more likely to die by suicide than divorced women.
10 times.
Let's just sit with that for a second. 10 times more likely. That is a horrifying statistic that you almost never hear discussed in mainstream conversations about marriage and divorce.
It is a deeply troubling statistic.
Yeah.
And it requires a deeper psychological analysis to understand why that disparity exists.
How does Riker explain it?
He connects this tragic outcome directly to his assertion that modern marriage and the subsequent divorce machine systematically strip men of what he identifies as the three foundational pillars of masculine identity.
The three pillars: purpose, property, and progeny. Let's break those down for the listener.
Sure. Purpose relates to a man's role as a provider and a protector, which society tells him is his primary value.
Right.
Property is the tangible wealth, the home, the assets he has spent his life accumulating. Progeny, of course, means his children.
And what happens during a divorce?
Riker argues that when a man is divorced against his will, he loses his role in the household. That's his purpose. He loses his home and half his income, his property. And, as we will get into shortly, he often loses daily access to his children, his progeny.
So all three pillars are knocked out at once.
Exactly. When all three of these biological and societal foundations are obliterated simultaneously, backed by the threat of state force and imprisonment if he fails to pay, Riker argues it leads directly to the devastation that results in these massive suicide rates.
The man looks at his future, sees nothing but endless labor for someone who left him, and the psychological burden becomes unsurvivable.
That transition right there brings us perfectly into the next major battleground the book covers: fatherhood and the family courts.
Right, because if the financial side of the marriage plantation is bleak, the custody side is described as an absolute minefield.
The numbers here are just as extreme.
They really are.
Yeah.
Riker pulls data from the UK Ministry of Justice showing that mothers win 92% of contested custody cases.
92%.
And looking at the US, he cites National Parents Organization data showing that only 17.5% of custodial parents are fathers.
Whenever we see disparities that large, 92% in the UK, over 80% in the US, it forces us to look at the underlying legal philosophies guiding these judges.
What's the philosophy behind it?
Riker argues that despite all the modern cultural claims of gender equality, family courts still heavily, almost exclusively, rely on something called the tender years doctrine.
For anyone not familiar with family law history, what exactly is the tender years doctrine?
It's an old Victorian legal principle. Historically, way back, fathers actually retained custody of children because children were seen as part of the household economy.
But that shift?
Right, and in the 19th century, this shifted to the tender years doctrine. This legally presumed that children inherently need their mothers more than their fathers during their early formative years. The mother was deemed the natural caregiver.
But courts don't officially use that anymore, right? They use the best interest of the child standard.
It's exactly. But Riker asserts that while courts claim to have abandoned this doctrine in favor of the gender-neutral best interest of the child standard, the statistical reality proves they are still operating on this outdated myth of maternal superiority.
They just use different vocabulary to reach the exact same outcome.
Precisely. Defaulting custody to women.
And the book dives deeply into the psychological warfare that happens once that custody is established. He cites research from Dr. Amy Baker, which is genuinely heartbreaking.
The parental alienation research.
Yes. Her data suggests that 22 million American fathers are systematically alienated from their children by their ex-spouses. Riker uses the term Saturday dads to describe this.
Saturday dads.
These are men who pay the bulk of their income in child support and alimony, yet are reduced to seeing their kids maybe 4 days a month. They become visitors in their own children's lives.
And parental alienation is a very specific, insidious tactic. It's not just physical separation.
Right. What does it actually look like in practice?
It's the custodial parent actively campaigning to turn the child against the non-custodial parent. Riker argues the court system is entirely complicit in this because they rarely punish mothers who violate visitation orders.
But if a man violates a financial order?
If a man misses a child support payment by a few weeks, he can have his driver's license suspended, his passport revoked, or be thrown in jail. It's the sheer disparity in how the state enforces the rules.
Which gets even darker when Riker tackles the issue of paternity. This part of the book is wild.
The paternity fraud chapter.
Yes. He brings up a statistic from the Nuffield Council stating that 1 in 10 fathers are actually raising other men's children without knowing it.
1 in 10.
And furthermore, he cites AAD lab data. These are the labs that do the actual DNA testing, showing a 30% rate of tested men not being the biological father. He firmly calls this paternity fraud.
We have to unpack the legal paradox Riker highlights here, because this is where his critique of the justice system becomes incredibly sharp.
Lay it out for us.
He points out that in 27 different states in the U.S., courts have legal precedent to force men to continue paying child support, even after DNA evidence conclusively proves they are not the biological father.
Let's make sure you heard that clearly. You get a DNA test, it proves the child is not yours, the mother lied to you, and the court still forces you to pay. How on earth does the legal system justify that?
The courts almost universally cite the best interest of the child.
Again with that phrase.
Right. Their argument is that if a man has acted as a father figure for a certain number of years, severing that financial tie would harm the child's standard of living.
He uses a specific example in the book that really drives this home.
Yes, a devastating example. A Detroit mechanic who was taken to court. A DNA test proved he was not the father of the child in question. Yet a judge ordered him to pay child support for 18 years, threatening him with jail time if he refused.
And Riker's framing of this is fascinating. He doesn't just look at it as a quirky legal loophole.
No, he views it systemically.
He frames this as proof that the system fundamentally prioritizes extracting male resources over fundamental biological truth, justice, or punishing female deception.
His comparison is very stark here.
He says, if a man steals money from a woman, it's fraud. If a woman lies about paternity to secure 18 years of funding, the state enforces the theft.
Exactly. And this leads directly into his discussion on reproductive coercion.
Right. The book cites 2021 CDC data showing that 12% of men experience condom sabotage or some form of reproductive coercion.
Like a partner explicitly lying about being on birth control.
Exactly. Riker frames this as a massive, glaring, one-way street of legal accountability. His argument is that if a man forces parenthood onto a woman, society rightfully views that as an egregious crime.
But if a woman intentionally traps a man with an unwanted pregnancy through deception, she isn't punished.
Instead, she is rewarded with a state-enforced 18-year claim on his gross income.
This is a heavy perspective, but it transitions very smoothly into the underlying framework of the entire book. To explain these societal and legal dynamics, Riker heavily relies on evolutionary psychology.
Chapter 5.
Yes, Chapter 5. He introduces the work of renowned evolutionary biologist David Buss. This is critical for understanding the manosphere worldview.
What did David Buss find?
Buss conducted exhaustive research spanning 37 different cultures across the globe. His findings prove that 85 to 89% of women heavily prioritize financial prospects and resource gathering ability in a mate.
And there's a stat about rejection, too.
Yes, an astounding 97% of women actively reject mates who earn less money than they do.
So why is this data so important to Riker's argument? Because
Yeah.
we hear constantly that traditional gender roles, the man as the provider, the woman seeking a provider, are just arbitrary social constructs pushed by a patriarchy.
Riker uses Buss's cross-cultural data to completely dismantle the social construct argument.
Because it's universal.
Exactly. If this behavior exists in 37 completely different cultures, varying from Western democracies to isolated tribal societies, it cannot be a localized social construct.
It's biological.
Riker argues that these behaviors are deeply embedded biological imperatives. Women are biologically wired to seek resources and security for potential offspring, and men are wired to produce those resources to gain access to reproduction.
He calls this the red pill reality of modern dating. For anyone who doesn't know, the red pill is a matrix reference adopted by the manosphere, meaning waking up to the uncomfortable truth of how female nature and society actually operate.
Rather than the romanticized Disney version we are constantly sold.
Right. And to back up this red pill reality, he looks at the most raw data set we have on human attraction today: modern dating apps.
Dating apps are essentially massive behavioral economics experiments.
Exactly. Riker pulls data from Cupid and Tinder. And the data shows that women rate a staggering 80% of men as below average in attractiveness.
Let's think about the mathematical impossibility of that. You can't have 80% of a population be below the 50th percentile.
Meanwhile, the top 10 to 18% of men, the elite tier, in terms of looks, height, and perceived status, are getting the vast majority of all matches and attention.
Which brings up the concept of hypergamy.
Yes, Riker points out that hypergamy, which is the biological female drive to marry up in status and resources, is alive and well. It hasn't disappeared in the modern era.
It has just been digitized and hyper-accelerated by algorithms.
So if we connect this hypergamous reality to the bigger picture of how men are instructed to behave in the modern world, Riker identifies a massive, destructive contradiction.
He calls it the vulnerability trap.
The vulnerability trap. Tell me more about how he defines this.
Society, mainstream media, and modern feminist rhetoric constantly demand that men open up. Men are told that their stoicism is toxic, that they need to communicate their deepest fears, cry, and show vulnerability to be healthy partners.
I think we hear that everywhere now.
We do. However, Riker argues that while society says it wants this, female biology actively and ruthlessly punishes men for doing exactly that.
How so?
Women's biological imperative, as we established with the evolutionary psychology data, seeks a strong, unshakable protector. When a man shows weakness, it triggers a subconscious disgust response in the biological wiring.
And what's wild is that he actually backs this up with data.
Hinge data, specifically.
Yes, he cites internal data from the dating app Hinge, showing that men who show insecurities, self-deprecation, or vulnerability on their profiles get 83% fewer matches.
It's a total turnoff.
And it's not just in dating. He cites a Harvard Business Review study examining the corporate world.
This study is fascinating.
The study showed that 74% of men who cried at work got passed over for promotions. Their leadership potential was permanently downgraded in the eyes of their peers and bosses.
Whereas when women cried at work, it often elicited sympathy and support.
Riker says it's a devastating double bind. If you remain stoic and traditional, you are labeled as possessing toxic masculinity.
But if you follow the new rules and become vulnerable, you are penalized biologically in the dating market and professionally in the workplace. You lose respect.
So, synthesizing all of this, the family court bias, the biological imperatives, the dating app disparities, what is the conclusion Riker draws for the average man?
Riker concludes that modern dating and marriage are no longer a search for a lifelong partner. He describes it as a resource extraction program disguised under the language of female empowerment.
Resource extraction program.
Because the risks of marriage are so catastrophic and the dating market is so heavily skewed against 80% of average men, he explains why movements like MGTOW have exploded in popularity.
MGTOW, men going their own way. The book notes this movement has seen a 300% growth since 2015.
Yes. For those unfamiliar, MGTOW is a philosophy where men make a conscious, rational choice to avoid marriage, cohabitation, and often dating entirely.
So it's not just a protest, it's a lifestyle shift.
Riker frames this not as bitterness, but as a calculated risk assessment. These men look at the data, the 80% divorce initiation rate, the 97% alimony rate, the custody losses, and they decide to completely withdraw from a game they believe is mathematically rigged against them.
Okay, let's pivot from the personal to the professional. Because chapter 15 of the book goes incredibly hard on what Riker calls corporate castration.
We hear so much in the media about the gender wage gap.
We are constantly reminded that women earn 82 cents on the dollar, though that's often debated. But Riker brings up the most glaring disparity that absolutely nobody talks about, the coffin gap.
The coffin gap is a stark reality check. Riker cites Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, and CDC data proving that men account for 92 to 93% of all workplace fatalities.
92 to 93%. That means if 100 people die on the job this year, 93 of them are men.
Men are dying in the sewers. They are being crushed on the oil rig.
They are falling off cell phone towers and power lines. They are doing the incredibly dangerous, dirty, physically destroying jobs that keep civilization running.
Yet, as Riker points out, society only seems to focus on achieving 50-50 gender equality in safe, air-conditioned corporate boardrooms.
Exactly. No one is demanding 50-50 representation on the deep-sea fishing boats or in the coal mines.
This specific point is the cornerstone of his argument regarding male disposability. Society views male bodies as inherently expendable for the greater good of the economy.
And what's fascinating is how Riker traces this concept of disposability from the blue-collar physical world right into the white-collar corporate environment.
Specifically through his analysis of human resources departments.
Let's talk about HR, because everyone who works in a corporate setting has experienced this shift. Riker points out government data showing that HR departments across the country are overwhelmingly female, roughly 73%.
Right. And Riker argues that because HR is overwhelmingly female, these departments have fundamentally weaponized corporate policy to favor female traits.
How does that play out day to day?
He argues that natural male ambition, directness, competitiveness, and blunt problem solving are increasingly pathologized as toxic or aggressive.
While female communication styles are rewarded.
Exactly. Consensus building, emotional intelligence, and non-direct feedback are rewarded as the only acceptable professional standard.
He brings up a massive cultural flashpoint to illustrate this, the firing of James Damore at Google.
Yes, the Google memo.
For anyone who doesn't remember, Damore was an engineer who wrote an internal memo citing peer-reviewed evolutionary biology, much like David Buss's work, to suggest that the gender disparities in tech might be partly due to differences in biological interests between the sexes, rather than just systemic sexism.
Men lean toward things, women lean toward people.
Right, it was a well-researched, calm memo, and Google fired him immediately. Riker uses this to show that stating biological facts in a female-dominated corporate culture is now a fireable offense.
He backs this up with data from Amazon as well. He references a 2021 Amazon diversity report regarding their massive warehouse operations.
What did the Amazon report show?
The report showed that male warehouse workers get hurt 3 times more often than female workers in identical roles, simply because they are expected to do the heavier lifting.
But the response to those injuries was different.
Very different. Despite this massive injury gap, men received 43% fewer safety adjustments or ergonomic interventions compared to women.
Why does Riker think that is?
Riker argues this happens because female-dominated HR and safety teams subconsciously view male pain and physical injury as normal. It's just part of the job for a man. Whereas female discomfort requires immediate corporate intervention.
And it's not just the warehouse floor. Riker examines the elite white-collar world too. He looks at 2022 and 2023 reports from Goldman Sachs.
These reports analyzed career progression in female-dominated sectors like HR, marketing, and PR.
And what did the data find?
The data found that men in these departments actually work 9.1% longer hours on average. They're putting in more time.
Yeah.
But they receive 14% fewer promotions.
This data is used to attack a very specific sociological concept, isn't it?
Yes, the concept of the glass escalator. The glass escalator is a feminist theory suggesting that when men enter female-dominated fields, they effortlessly rise to the top because of patriarchal privilege.
But the Goldman Sachs data contradicts that.
Riker says the data proves this is a myth. Men are actually penalized in environments where female managers prioritize compliance, emotional intelligence, and social cohesion over raw output and extra hours work.
And if we really want to talk about ultimate male disposability, we have to look at the geopolitical angle Riker highlights. He points to the horrific war in Ukraine.
The draft statistics there are undeniable.
He cites statistics showing that 97% of combat deaths are men. Ukraine literally closed its borders to men aged 18 to 60, forcing them to stay and fight, while women and children were allowed to flee as refugees.
Riker points out the sheer hypocrisy of international feminist groups in this context.
How so?
These organizations demand absolute, mandated equality in safe, lucrative spheres, like demanding quotas for female CEOs or politicians, but they remain entirely silent on the issue of conscription.
He brings it back to the U.S. with the selective service draft.
Right. In the United States, only 18-year-old boys are legally obligated to sign up for the selective service draft. If they don't, they lose access to federal student loans and government jobs and face prison time.
Society legally obligates men to die for their country.
And Riker argues that true equality would mean drafting 18-year-old girls to the front lines as well, which no one is actually advocating for.
This concept of disposability, that society doesn't care about male suffering, brings us to what is arguably the most intense chapter of the book.
The chapter on false accusations.
Yes. Riker transitions from physical disposability in war to reputational disposability in the legal system. He calls false accusations the nuclear option in the modern gender war.
Let's look at the numbers he uses here. Riker cites varied data points from the FBI, the Department of Justice, and the UK Home Office.
What did the stats say?
The statistics fluctuate depending on the methodology, but they consistently show that anywhere from 5 to 10%, or specifically a solid 8% in certain UK studies of rape claims, are provably, demonstrably false.
Provably false, not just unproven due to lack of evidence, but actively fabricated.
Exactly. 8% might not sound like a lot to some people, but Riker argues that this is an incredibly high rate for a crime that instantly, permanently destroys a man's reputation, career, and life without any required physical evidence.
And to pull this out of the realm of abstract statistics and make it real for you, the listener, the book walks through some devastating, high-profile examples of lives ruined by false accusations.
He brings up the Duke lacrosse team scandal from 2006.
I remember that. 3 young men, college athletes, had their lives completely torched by a false accusation.
The media amplified the lie, the university abandoned them, and the prosecutor pushed the case despite knowing the evidence was fabricated.
They were eventually exonerated, but the damage was irreversible. He also talks about Brian Banks. This story is just tragic.
Very tragic.
Banks was a high school football star, heavily recruited on his way to the NFL. He was falsely accused by a classmate. He spent 5 years in a maximum security prison and years on the sex offender registry.
And it was all a lie.
Years later, his accuser secretly admitted on tape that she made the whole thing up so her mother could sue the school district for money. Banks lost his youth, his freedom, and his NFL dreams over a lie.
And the woman faced 0 jail time for the perjury that stole 5 years of his life.
Riker also mentions the case of Liam Allen in the UK.
Allen faced years of legal hell, staring down a massive prison sentence. The police withheld evidence.
It was a huge scandal over there.
It was only at the very last minute of his trial that a hidden trove of 40,000 text messages from the accuser was released, proving definitively that she had manufactured the entire scenario and that the encounters were consensual.
Riker uses these specific, horrific cases to transition into a broader critique of the university system, specifically Title IX's tribunals. Now, for the listener who might just think of Title IX as the law that created women's sports in college, what does Riker mean by a Title IX tribunal?
Over the last decade, universities have established internal disciplinary panels to handle accusations of sexual misconduct, entirely separate from the actual police or criminal justice system.
Riker describes these panels as kangaroo courts.
Why? Because the accused men are routinely denied basic constitutional rights. They're often denied the right to have a lawyer present. They cannot cross-examine their accuser.
And the standard of proof is different.
Yes, it's lowered from beyond a reasonable doubt, which is what would keep you out of jail in a real court, to a preponderance of the evidence, which essentially means 50.1% likely.
Riker frames this not as a pursuit of justice, but as an ideological lynching. He argues these tribunals are driven by a dogmatic adherence to the Believe All Women slogan.
By adopting a policy where the accuser must be believed by default, you fundamentally subvert the cornerstone of Western law.
The presumption of innocence. You are guilty the moment the accusation is spoken.
And this assumption of male guilt isn't just happening on college campuses. It's hardwired into our actual police protocols. Riker explains a system known as the Duluth model.
Yes, the Duluth model. We need to spend a minute explaining this because this affects almost every domestic violence police call in the country.
The Duluth model was created in the 1980s by feminist sociologists in Duluth, Minnesota. It is the standard operating protocol used by law enforcement agencies across the U.S. for handling domestic violence.
And what is the core philosophy of this model?
The core philosophy is that domestic violence is an extension of patriarchal control. It inherently assumes that the man is the primary aggressor, using violence to maintain dominance over the woman.
But Riker completely shatters this assumption with massive data sets. Here's where the numbers get crazy.
He brings in Harvard research.
Yes, he cites a comprehensive Harvard University research study showing that 57% of all intimate partner violence is actually mutual. Both parties are hitting each other.
And the data on one-sided violence is even more surprising.
He cites CDC data analyzing non-reciprocal domestic violence, meaning only one person is being violent. The CDC data shows that women actually initiate 70% of non-reciprocal domestic violence. Women are hitting men who are not hitting them back.
So you have data showing women initiate the majority of one-sided violence. Yet because the police are trained under the Duluth model, which assumes male aggression and female victimhood, the outcomes are completely skewed.
Riker points out the terrifying reality of this.
When a man is actively being physically attacked by his wife, and he does the right thing and calls 911 for help, the police arrive, apply the Duluth model, and he is the one who ends up in handcuffs.
The system cannot process a male victim, so it arrests him as the presumed abuser.
If we connect this to the broader cultural narrative, Riker argues that this intense bias, this assumption that males are inherently defective or dangerous, begins long before a man ever reaches a courtroom, a university tribunal, or a corporate HR department.
It begins the moment he steps into a classroom as a child.
Yes. Chapter 10 focuses on the feminization of education. Riker cites U.S. Department of Education statistics showing that boys receive a staggering 70% of all school suspensions.
70%? Why is there such a huge gap?
He argues that the modern classroom has been fundamentally redesigned to favor female learning styles. Girls naturally excel at sitting still, focusing quietly, and cooperation.
While boys naturally possess high energy, competitiveness, and a need for physical movement.
Rather than accommodating male biology, Riker argues schools pathologize natural, energetic masculine behavior as a behavioral disorder.
He backs this up with 2023 OECD data showing that boys are 3 times more likely to be medicated for ADHD than girls.
3 times more likely.
Riker says we aren't educating boys anymore. We are chemically castrating them. We are pumping them full of Ritalin and Adderall to force compliance because female-dominated teaching staff, much like female-dominated HR departments, can't or won't handle natural boy energy.
And then there's the grading gap, which is perhaps the most insidious form of bias because of its long-term effects.
Oh, this study blew my mind. He mentions a fascinating study of OECD PISA tests in Germany. This was a blind grading study.
Let's explain how that works for the listener. Researchers took identical math papers, same answers, same exact mistakes. They handed them to teachers to grade.
The only difference was the name at the top of the paper. Half the teachers thought a boy wrote it, half thought a girl wrote it.
And the results. When teachers graded the exact same math paper, they gave the paper a 38% lower score when they thought a boy had written it.
38%. That isn't statistical anomaly. That is active systemic prejudice.
Think about the compounding effect of that over a 12-year education.
It destroys a boy's GPA, ruins his college admission chances, and completely crushes his internal belief in his own intelligence. Riker asserts that this educational sabotage is entirely intentional.
He further argues that this systemic bias is reinforced by constant, inescapable media brainwashing.
He looks at Hollywood and TV.
He cites findings from the Gina Davis Institute, which is ironically a feminist organization, revealing that 78% of domestic conflict scenes in television and film feature a male villain.
And there's a study from USC, too.
Furthermore, a massive University of Southern California study showed that male characters are 5 times more likely to be portrayed as criminals, murderers, or abusers than female characters.
Think about the tropes we see every day. The bumbling, incompetent sitcom dad whose smart wife has to fix his messes. The violent male antagonist.
It's everywhere.
Riker's analysis here is sharp. He argues that this cultural gaslighting normalizes anti-male bias from a very young age. It trains society and it trains young girls to view men as inherently defective, dangerous, or stupid.
Okay, so we've covered the law, the workplace, the schools, and the media. But Riker also dives deep into history and religion, exploring how sacred institutions viewed manhood before what he calls their capture.
Right. He wants to show the listener that it wasn't always this way. He looks at various religious movements to show how they functioned as fortresses for masculinity before modern ideologies infiltrated them.
He uses Mormon polygamy in the 1830s as an example.
Now, modern sensibilities view polygamy strictly as female oppression, but Riker frames it entirely differently. He argues it was a system focused entirely on male duty, provision, and leadership.
In that system, a man only gained multiple wives if he proved he was highly capable of providing for a massive household. Responsibility was rewarded with absolute authority.
He synthesizes this historical view to explain the fall of various modern religious institutions through the lens of institutional capture. He looks at the Anglican Church.
Pointing out that attendance absolutely plummeted over the last few decades.
Why? Because, according to Riker, the church underwent theological shifts that prioritized political pandering, emotionalism, and the ordination of women over traditional, rigid masculine authority. Men simply stopped going.
He notes similar changes in Reform Judaism. He points out changes regarding patrilineal descent, which he claims diluted the traditional patriarchal structure and led to massive assimilation and a huge drop in in-faith marriages.
He even takes this globally, looking at Hindu temple laws in India. He points out India's dowry law, specifically Section 498A.
Section 498A is a law designed to prevent dowry extortion. But Riker points out how it has been weaponized, much like Title IX or the Duluth model.
How is it weaponized?
Under this law, a wife can simply accuse her husband and his entire family of dowry harassment, and the police are required to arrest them immediately without investigation.
And what are the statistics on those accusations?
The National Crime Records Bureau in India indicates that an astounding 75% of those accusations are entirely false, used simply as leverage in divorce negotiations.
And circling back to the West, he talks about how the Christian Bible itself is weaponized against men today. He claims that in modern family courts and even in modern churches, scriptures like Ephesians 5 are heavily cherry-picked.
Judges and pastors will use the verses demanding that men love their wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her.
They use this to demand that men sacrifice everything, their money, their homes, their peace, to appease their wives.
But, Riker notes, they completely ignore the immediately preceding verses that establish male authority, headship, and female submission.
Riker argues that modern society demands the traditional back-breaking sacrifices of men, while completely stripping them of the traditional respect, loyalty, and authority that made that sacrifice worthwhile.
This raises the ultimate, most important question for you, the listener. If the system is as hostile, rigged, and inescapable as Riker claims, what exactly is a man supposed to do?
The final chapters of the book are dedicated to coping strategies, tactical defenses, and what Riker calls ultimate freedom.
Let's get into the tactics. First, he outlines financial advice for men to build what he calls financial fortresses.
Because if the state is coming for your assets, you have to hide them legally. He discusses utilizing Delaware LLCs to compartmentalize and protect business assets from marital claims. He explores using Puerto Rico's Act 60.
Let's explain Act 60 for anyone who isn't a tax lawyer. Puerto Rico offers incredible tax incentives, essentially 0% capital gains tax for high net worth individuals who establish residency there.
But Riker isn't just talking about saving on taxes.
No, he frames moving to Puerto Rico as jurisdictional arbitrage. It's a way to remove yourself and your assets from the immediate reach of mainland U.S. family court enforcements and alimony claims.
He also heavily advocates for the use of offshore accounts and cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin, and even more so, Monero.
Monero is a privacy coin that is incredibly difficult to trace.
He advises men to convert their wealth into these decentralized assets to shield them from what he views as predatory judges. If the judge can't find the money, they can't give it to your ex-wife.
He also talks about legal armor. If a man absolutely has to get married, perhaps for religious reasons or to have children, Riker discusses the absolute necessity of ironclad, 37-page prenuptial agreements.
Though he gives a massive glaring warning here. He cites data showing that 38% of prenups are eventually tossed out by family court judges.
Right. Judges have immense discretionary power. If a judge decides a prenup is unconscionable or unfair at the time of the divorce, even if both parties happily signed it a decade prior, the judge can just tear it up.
Because of this, Riker looks at international strategies, like the Romeo Pacts in Spain.
These are essentially prenups on steroids, requiring separate legal counsel, video recordings of the signing, and intense financial disclosures to make them bulletproof.
And on a day-to-day survival level, Riker's advice gets very intense. He says men must treat every single interaction with an ex-wife or an unstable partner as an active legal battle. He advises the absolute necessity of recording everything.
He literally calls the Apple Watch the ultimate truth machine.
If you are arguing with your partner, hit record on your watch. If she threatens to call the police and falsely accuse you of hitting her, which we know happens via the Duluth model, you have the audio file to save you from a prison sentence.
Beyond legal and financial defense, Riker emphasizes reclaiming the physical body and finding a tribe. He reminds readers of a chilling warning from the Endocrine Society regarding a 20% drop in average male testosterone levels over the last 2 decades.
Men are literally becoming chemically less masculine.
His advice here is incredibly direct, almost primal. He tells men to reject soy-heavy, microplastic-filled modern diets.
He tells them to lift heavy weights, eat red meat, optimize their hormones, and physically fortify themselves against a world that actively wants them weak, docile, and medicated.
Furthermore, he urges men to form brotherhood networks.
And to be clear, these aren't the emotional support groups society pushes where men sit in circles, hold hands, and cry about their feelings.
Riker envisions these networks as hierarchical, merit-based tribes. They are focused on accountability, physical training, skill building, and mutual financial protection, completely and utterly rejecting the feminist demand for male vulnerability.
And this all culminates in the final grand societal thesis of the book, which she calls the herbivore solution. To explain this, Riker looks at Japan.
Japan currently has millions of young men known as herbivore men.
These are men who have completely opted out of dating, marriage, sex, and corporate ambition. They just play video games, work part-time jobs, and live peacefully alone.
This phenomenon has led to Japan's plummeting birth rate, currently sitting at a catastrophic 1.26.
But here is the critical pivot in Riker's argument. He doesn't portray the herbivore men as a defeat, a tragedy, or failure of masculinity.
He portrays their behavior as a highly rational, calculated market correction.
Exactly. It is a strategic withdrawal. These men have looked at the marriage contract. They have looked at the 80% divorce initiation rates, the 97% alimony stats, the loss of children, the corporate disposability, and the false accusation risks.
And they have realized that the system offers a massive, mathematically guaranteed negative return on investment. So they simply refuse to play.
It is a profound shift in societal mechanics. Riker is essentially arguing that when the state makes the legal, financial, and emotional cost of traditional masculinity too high, men will simply stop participating.
They won't riot. They will just quietly quit. They'll focus on their own peace, their own retained wealth, and their own hobbies, leaving the massive societal engine entirely without its primary fuel source.
Wow. Just wow. We have covered an immense amount of ground today. We've unpacked raw data, the legal history, and the intense, polarizing arguments from Conrad Riker's book.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, provocative thought to mull over, one that builds directly on the text we've analyzed today.
Let's hear it.
If Riker's predictions hold true, and this marriage strike and the MGTOW philosophy continue to expand globally, alongside plummeting birth rates and a mass male withdrawal from the corporate workforce, we face an unprecedented macroeconomic cliff.
How will modern consumer economies survive?
Exactly. Economies fundamentally rely on the surplus labor, the physical risk-taking, and the massive tax revenue generated by driven, family-oriented men trying to provide for wives and children. How will they sustain themselves over the next 50 years?
If the builders, the providers, and the protectors decide to simply lay down their tools and walk away, what happens to the civilization they were building?
It's a question we are all going to have to face.
That is a chilling, fascinating, and deeply important question to end on. I want to thank you for taking this incredibly deep, objective, and unflinching journey with us today through a highly controversial and deeply fascinating text.
Again, please take a second right now to like and subscribe to the show so we can keep bringing you these massive deep dives into the ideas shaping our culture.
And finally, you have heard the data. You have heard the arguments, we've laid out the statistics. But to truly understand this movement, you need to see the citations and read the author's own words for yourself. Go grab your own copy of the ebook, check Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks right now to buy Marriage Deformed.
Also, make sure to follow the author directly at at Conrad Riker on Substack.
Yes, as well as on Twitter and YouTube to continue exploring these massive cultural topics and see where the manosphere conversation is heading next. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.